coming globalist storm. How worried are you? How worried should you be? That's the topic of today's Golden Run. I'm your host, Cheryl Chumley, giving you a Christian conservative look at today's news, politics, culture, and events. We just came off the Davos meeting, right, where all the elites and bureaucrats and pinhead politicians of the world met to discuss how they, at the very top, the 1%ers of the world, could best control us peons, the 99% at the bottom. And some of the things they say are alarming, to put it lightly. How much concern, though, should we have about this globalist agenda seeping into America? Personally speaking, under this president, under this White House, under this puppet called Joe Biden, I see globalism alongside the open border issue as the biggest political issue of our days. The point where America, depending on how votes go in this coming election, the point where America could actually cease and desist to be America the Free. Just a thought. Before I get into more of that, I want to quickly mention, if you like Bold and Blunt, you may get Bold and Blunt at edify.app, at washingtontimes.com, where you may also subscribe to Bold and Blunt. How do you do it? Well, go to washingtontimes.com, scroll to the bottom of the page, find the newsletter section, click on it, find Bold and Blunt with Cheryl Chumley, click on that. I think you just need to put in your email address and you'll be subscribed to my Bold and Blunt newsletter. It comes out Mondays, Wednesdays, Fridays, delivered right to your email box, contains my commentaries that I write about all the issues of importance that are impacting American liberties, God-given rights, and so forth, as well as my twice weekly Tuesday and Thursday Bold and Blunt podcasts. You can also get Bold and Blunt at Real Life Network and wherever podcasts are available. I want to quickly read you this. This was from the World Economic Forum's page in January of 2023 on the heels of Davos that year. The headline reads, "Deglobalization or re-globalization." It's more a, quote, cocktail, end quote, of globalization, says an expert at Davos. And the key takeaways from this January 2023 gathering of Davos bureaucrats was, A, globalization is declining for the first time since the Second World War. But what does the future hold? B, a cocktail of globalization will define this new era. And C, the energy transition will create more connections as part of the shifting mix. And I would just like to point out that when globalists talk about connections, they're talking about globalism. They're talking about coordination among governments, which means somebody has to decide how exactly, precisely those governments will coordinate, which is where the Davos crowd helpfully steps into the picture with the promise to rule and control all of the world because, of course, they're the most educated, they're the brightest people in the room. So now fast forward a year to Davos 2024. And there is this report that the World Economic Forum put out called the Global Risks Report 2024, and it's based on the most recent assessment of all the bureaucrats who attend Davos and their minions and aides and helpers and so forth who take part in determining what the biggest risks are worldwide. And they use this report as sort of the precursor to how they're going to address the biggest risks of the world. And among their top risks, right, extreme weather, misinformation and disinformation, and political polarization. Isn't that interesting? Here in America, we have our own general concerns, which could be called open borders, Democrats' hatred of America, the ongoing fight over abortion at the states' levels, the indoctrination of our children in the public school systems that used to be tops in the world and now have really devolved into breeding grounds for the Marxists and communists and socialists who masquerade as our teachers under this union, this teacher union-driven education system we now have. See, so those would be the risks that Americans might concern themselves most with. But according to the World Economic Forum, the biggest risks in 2 years, right? In 2 years out, over this, let me just read you right from this report instead of trying to paraphrase. Global risks ranked by severity over the short and long term, with the short term being 2 years and long term being 10 years. This is what they come up with. Number 1, misinformation and disinformation. That's 2 years. Number 2, for the short term, 2 years, extreme weather events. Number 3, for the short term, societal polarization. You know, you can put that in a different phrase and come up with the exact same meaning. You can call it Democrat control, right? Because Democrats really are very talented at dividing society so they can try and conquer society. Number four, for the short term, cyber insecurity. Why wouldn't this be number 1? Why wouldn't cyber insecurity? Why wouldn't concerns about hacking and so forth be number 1? Instead, the globalists talk about misinformation and disinformation. And you know why? Because there's an election coming and Donald Trump is on the fast track to win back the White House. The Democrats have tried for so long to control what's put out on social media, and for many years, they were very successful at this, right? They were very successful at shutting down any type of dissenting opinion or any type of argument or viewpoint that countered the Democrat narrative when it came time to talking about the 2020 election results or the coronavirus and the Democrat-run mitigation efforts and the forced shots and the futility of social distancing and forced face masking and so forth. They were very adept at shutting down any type of dissenting views. And then came Elon Musk, the purchase of Twitter, the change of Twitter to X, and the sudden departure of this platform, now called X, from its censorship world, right? The sudden opening of free speech once again on social media. So now we're seeing that, hey, there aren't that many Democrat sheep in America as we thought. As a matter of fact, by and large, the American public is very thinking and very sick and tired of the Democrat censorship and the Democrat controls that have led us down a path of really destruction in America, largely and most rapidly because of the open borders. So we're seeing all kinds of dissenting opinions put out on social media, and the Democrats, hand in hand with their partners in global governments, are getting a little bit frightened at that because it's not going to be so easy this time around, this 2024 White House election time around, to pretend as if Americans hate MAGA and pretend as if Americans detest Donald Trump and pretend as if the idea of America first is something that Americans no longer embrace, but rather embrace a globalist viewpoint. Well, guess what? We don't. So no wonder World Economic Forum in its 2024 Global Risks Report writes as the top 2-year short-term concern, misinformation and disinformation. And they specifically talk about how it has the potential to further widen societal and political divides. And then it goes on to write, as close to 3 billion people are expected to head to the electoral polls across several economies. It lists Bangladesh, India, Indonesia, Mexico, Pakistan, the United Kingdom, and ding, 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 the United States over the next 2 years. The widespread use of misinformation and disinformation and tools to disseminate it, meaning Elon Musk, may undermine the legitimacy of newly elected governments. They're worried Donald Trump's going to win. And so they have to do what they can to shut down his ability to win. They have to do what they can to control the debate and control the talk about how Donald Trump is probably the most persecuted politician in American history. I mean, seriously, he and his family have endured from 2015 when he announced his candidacy for the Republican primary to now when he's campaigning for president for 2024, in between his courtroom appearances by political partisans and his courtroom hearings by anti-Trumpers and so forth. He's probably become one of the most, if not the most, persecuted politicians in American history. The number 2, extreme weather events. That is the nonstop, ongoing, never ceasing attempt of globalists to claim that climate change is the number 1 threat of our time, the one that leads to wars, poverty, starvation, and so forth and so on, and breathing problems, or whatever else they want to throw in there. And viruses, that's right, viruses, because we saw after the coronavirus, when that started dying down and Democrats lost their tools to control the American citizenry, that they had to create something else to hype a new fear, to test out the potential for a new fright. And they fell back on their age-old climate change alarmism, this time linking it to the potential for more viruses where people could die, by making claims such as, when development goes forth unchecked, then trees are cut down, forests are raised to make room for the developments, and the animals who live in those forested areas are forced to flee and therefore relocate in areas that are closer in proximity to humans. And as animals are carriers of germs and diseases and viruses, that means that humans living in those communities are at greater risk of catching germs and diseases and viruses from these poor animals who were forced out of their home, like Bambi and his family when the fire came and so forth. And it leads to more viruses in human populations, and people could die. So you see, if we can control the climate, if we can control the development, if we can control how people build and where they build and so forth, and control people's ability to cut down trees and build and produce and grow, well, then we can control how close animals can actually get to humans, and therefore, by logical extension in these scientists' minds, at least that's what their computer models that they create and fabricate out of thin air tell them, we can control the number of viruses that people get, and we can save lives. So, I swear, with globalists, with bureaucrats and the global governments, things never change. Their arguments never change. Their fights never change. So just really quickly, before I bring on my guest, the 2-year risks, the short-term global risks, top: misinformation and disinformation, extreme weather events, societal polarization, cyber insecurity, and interstate armed conflict comes in at number 5. For their 10-year, their long-term risks for the globe, for the world, right? Extreme weather events, climate change makes it back into the top spot. You know why? because the election was over, right? 2024 is over, so they can tamp down some of the hype. Whether Donald Trump wins or not, they're planning for the long term, right? And it's back to climate change. So take a memo here, take a note. Climate change is going to be on the World Economic Forum, the United Nations, the World Health Organization, all the global bureaucrats' minds and talking point lists for at least the next 10 years, because they've already deemed it the top worry, the top concern, the top impact to address in 10 years. Number 2, critical change to Earth's systems. So that's just another way of saying climate change. Number 3, biodiversity loss and ecosystem collapse. That, again, is just another way of saying climate change. So looking ahead to long-term risks to the entire planet for the next 10 years, the top 3 spots all deal with climate change. Oh, look, number 4, natural resource shortages. Again, climate change. My goodness, we better hurry up and give this Davos crowd control over human activities now. Otherwise, the world's going to explode within the next 10 years. And number 5, coming in at number 5, misinformation and disinformation. These reports, on one hand, laughable, right? On one hand, you can toss them off. But on the other hand, they actually are the blueprint for how these globalists actively plan and strategize to clamp down on individual rights for the foreseeable future. So now we know climate change is going to be their number 1 talking point, their number 1 drumbeat, right, for the next decade or so. No matter how weather patterns emerge, no matter what happens in terms of the weather in the coming years, the globalists already have it in their hearts and minds that this is the number 1 issue they need to address. You know why? Because it's not about the weather. It's not about weather patterns. It's about control, pure and simple. The globalists, the United Nations, and the Democrats, right, have all latched on to the idea that the environment is the number 1 issue that they can use to exert controls on the masses, because the environment touches everything that people do. My guest today is going to speak a little bit more about how globalists work and kind of put it in perspective that this is not exactly new, which, depending on how you look at it, that could be a note of optimism, right? I mean, if this has historically been how human society has run its course in the political world for decades and decades now, then this idea of Klaus Schwab and the Great Reset and Joe Biden with the Build Back Better and, the New World Order, the One World Order and all that, then it kind of can be put into context of, I don't want to say yawn, been there, done that, but at least it doesn't spark maybe as much hysteria or fear or panic or alarm as it could be as if this was brand new. I don't know, you tell me. My guest, Larry Schweikart, author of Patriot's History of Globalism, Its Rise and Decline. Larry, thank you so much for being on Bold and Blunt. It is so great to have you here.
Well, I appreciate the opportunity to talk about the new book.
Yes, I love this topic, Patriot's History of Globalism, Its Rise and Decline. And in it, you make the case that the idea of the One World Order, New World Order type of globalism is nothing new.
That's exactly right. It goes back to the Congress of Vienna in 1814 after they booted Napoleon out of Europe and they were trying to set up a new Europe. And all the people thought, they're going to set up wonderful democracies for us. It's going to be great. They're going to listen to the people. Nope. They put all the kings back in place. Then they tried it again after World War I with the Treaty of Versailles and the League of Nations. The Americans said, nope, we don't want any of that. Then they tried it again after World War II in 2 different ways by having the scientists try to control atomic energy, and that didn't go over. Then they set up the Bretton Woods economic system that lasted about 50 years, but we're starting to see that come apart now too. So they've tried. The good news is they've tried a number of times and failed a number of times.
It's interesting you say the League of Nations, because while America didn't join the League of Nations, just a short time later, we did join the United Nations.
That's right. And when we joined, President Truman said, "Oh, this is a gift from God. This is going to be so wonderful." And probably we were bailed out of the scientists controlling a lot of American policy by our friends in the Soviet Union, who managed to constantly create one gap after another, whether it was murdering various diplomats or whether it was taking over new countries. And finally, we said, we're going to have to play tough with these guys. They're not going to rule the world with us.
So if you're an American right now and you are in love with American liberty, and along with that you cherish American exceptionalism and so forth, and you pay attention to what's going on with the global governments, the World Economic Forum, World Health Organization, UN, and so forth, reading your book, should we be comforted by the fact that this is more of the old coming back in new form, or should we be disturbed by it?
Well, I don't think you should be disturbed. I mean, history gives you lots of examples of what not to do. And it's very clear they tried this before. It's also fairly clear from more recent history that people around the world are really rejecting this stuff in record levels. You know, we've had a number of elections, whether it's Slovakia, Hungary, Argentina, Estonia, that have moved toward a more populist government. Another really good sign was that in Davos, they recently had their big confab there under the heading of restoring trust. Now, yeah, good luck with that. But anyway, the good news is that most major world leaders did not even attend. Biden wasn't there, Prime Minister of England wasn't there, Italy wasn't there, France wasn't there, China wasn't there, Russia wasn't there. The only big name leader who went was Javier Milei of Argentina, and he went there so he could read him the riot act. So I think there's a lot of hope on the horizon.
So when you look at globalism, would it ever be a good thing for Americans?
No, absolutely not. It violates our very Constitution that says the American people have the right to govern how this country is run. We are the source of the country's freedom and independence and strength. And so any attempts to impose, whether it's financial globalism through the IMF or the UN, or whether it's medical globalism through the WHO, not the rock band. They came and sat there or said it's the Troubadour, not them. The World Health Organization, the WHO. All of this has to be rejected because it all impinges on American freedom and American liberties, which is another good reason to have hope, because it's irrelevant what the World Health Organization does. No treaty can get through the U.S. without being ratified by a 2/3 vote of the Senate. And right now they wouldn't even have 51 votes, let alone 2/3.
You're absolutely right in that. And I guess that would be the note of optimism. But what I'm seeing, and you probably touched on this in your research and maybe even in your book, Patriot's History of Globalism. But what I'm seeing is many of these agendas, such as climate change, they couldn't pass in America, in the Senate, the ratification process, say the Paris Treaty. Remember that? But what happened is corporations started taking up the agenda of the Paris Treaty and putting it in play as part of their so-called wokeism.
Right.
What are you seeing taking place, sidestepping Congress, sidestepping the Constitution, and using the corporate structures to bring about a globalist agenda?
Well, of course, you got Larry Fink of BlackRock saying, people are going to have to be forced to do this stuff, and that doesn't sit very well with Americans. You look at, for example, their effort with the vax, and 83% of Americans took one vax.
Yep.
52% took the second. Now the numbers show that only 1% will take another China virus vax. When it comes to these corporations, I agree they're trying to make an in run by instituting DEI and wokeism. That's not going over so well. Bud Light has lost billions of dollars trying to do this and have made a U-turn. Probably the last to turn will be Disney, and they are having big troubles. They did turn out a profitable report only because of the parks, but their movies are losing money hand over fist, and it's only a matter of time before even Disney has to bail out of this stuff. So I think that corporations, whether they want to or not, ultimately are forced to play by market rules, and the market does not want this garbage.
I would like to be as optimistic on that front as you describe, right? Because logically speaking, it sounds like that should be the case. But I still hear Klaus Schwab and the Davos crowd, which I did not know about, some of those events not being attended by world leaders. So that's interesting to note. But I still hear from Klaus Schwab and the Davos crowd, the Great Reset, and they're insistent on putting it into play, despite the fact of what you lay out. People don't want it.
Well, yeah, you're right. I mean, they're going to keep trying. The enemy never sleeps. But Schwab is not the one I worry about. The guy I'm really focused on is this Noah Harari nut.
Yes.
Who is like the Antichrist. And this guy's like the false prophet. He's crazy. He wants to rewire humans to be these kind of Borg-like people. But here's the thing with them. Okay, Soros last year announced he was pulling out of Europe. I mean, that's a major victory for our side that he can't make any more progress there. With the climate change stuff, there was a story out today that now they're warning about these Arctic winds and the trade winds and so on and so forth, and it's going to be global freezing. Well, wait a minute. We've just had 30 years of them trying to tell us that what humans are doing is heating up the planet. So now it's freezing. They lose such credibility with ordinary people. When ordinary people learn what they're doing, that I don't think they can survive. They will try, but I don't think that they can be successful.
So here's where I wonder if the coming storm then is going to brew even harder, because as you say, when people are educated on the truth of issues, they reject it. But look at what's taking place in America's public school system. And they're being taught to welcome and embrace a more globalist viewpoint instead of American sovereignty. What did you find about that during your research? How concerned are you? How concerned should we be?
Well, of course, I'm very concerned because I have a skin in the game. I have a homeschool curriculum for my book, Patriot's History of the United States, where I teach all the lessons in video. And I go to all the homeschool conventions. Homeschooling has exploded. Depending on whose stats you accept, it's either grown by 100% or by 200% in the last 5 years. Now, here in my state of Arizona, we passed an not ESG, I want to say ESG. It's a voucher. It begins with E, educational support, something or other. And it basically gives parents the money for every single student to use as they see fit. They can send them to public school, private school, charter, or homeschool. Well, the result here in Arizona has been a massive exodus from public schools, and they know that's what's going to happen if parents get a choice. So there are numerous states right now looking at these vouchers, and I think you're going to see these adopted in a number of states because, guess what? Our top 10 scoring schools were all private or charter schools. So you're right. I mean, the education system is a mess. College enrollment is down 4% and falling because people just find that all they're getting is woke. I see a lot of hope on the horizon across the board in education for this kind of stuff.
Great. That certainly is good news. When you look back in the research for your book, Patriot's History of Globalism, did you find any common denominator where the sort of rebel spirit would rise up and beat back the globalist agenda, that people were finally fed up and said no more?
Well, it's more of, rather than saying what happened within French society or what happened within the global financial system. It's not just one thing. What reassures me is that it's always something. There's old Saturday Night Live, Rosanna Dana. It's always something, right? And it's either people rising up or the system breaks down on its own. For example, after Napoleon, they were supposed to have permanent peace. Well, they had 2 wars in the next 75 years because these people cannot control other populations and other nations. Or it's the farmer protests in Brussels and in Paris, and now it's spreading to London and Ireland. Or it's the simple breakdown of the Bretton Woods system, which has for 50 years depended on the U.S. Navy almost entirely to promote free trade around the globe by protecting trade routes. And the American people said, enough. We're done with this kind of huge budgetary spending on the military. So it's something different in every place. It's always different, yet always the same. Something always seems to pop up.
Do you think America should get out of the United Nations? Should we stop funding and participating? Okay, yes.
That's
what?
An easy one.
What?
Yeah, that's an easy one. Yes,
what?
Absolutely.
Let me just play devil's advocate, because one argument to stay in it would be to keep an eye on what's going on and have an influence from within.
Well, you could do what we did with the League of Nations and have an observer who was a non-voting member. But let's face it, it's the U.S. against almost every other nation in the world. Whenever there's a serious vote about almost anything, you see the U.S. is often standing alone. And that's changed dramatically since the fall of the Soviet Union, when we had numerous allies, France, Britain, Germany, others, who would vote with us. So I don't really see much of a role for the UN anymore. I've looked at a number of academic studies, for example, on peacekeepers, UN peacekeepers. Do they really keep the peace? And even the academics admit, no, they don't keep the peace unless both sides are already prepared to accept them and to have a peace anyway. So I think the UN is an obsolete organization.
And what gets me is a lot of this anti-American sentiment breeds in the United Nations on America's own soil. The UN headquarters in New York.
Yeah.
Just to wrap up.
You know, they have a lot of room there at the UN. So perhaps the mayor there of New York, Eric the Red Adams, could manage to place all of his illegals there at the UN. That might work.
That's a good repurposing. There you go. Let me just wrap up with this last question, because American citizens, by and large, are in tune with what's taking place on the political spectrum. And I think there is a rising alarm being sounded about the coming globalism into America under this White House, under this Joe Biden administration. So it gets overwhelming to see all the battles taking place. How would you recommend, based on the research for Patriot's History of Globalism, that the individual American best fight off globalism?
Well, the first thing you need to do, and it's easier to do, is to get involved in local school boards. Even if you're homeschooling, your money is going to the local public schools. So get involved in those. Watch your local budget and political issues. You know, George Soros spent a fortune on local prosecutors so they would not prosecute various crimes to allow this crime wave that we have going on right now. At a larger level, don't give money to organizations like the Red Cross or Goodwill or others who support this illegal criminal invasion. I know they sound good, but they do not have America's best interests at heart. And then at the national level, turn out and vote. I mean, we could do a whole show on what I see as a absolute Trump tidal wave coming in November. You read all the Democrat analysts from Carville to Begala to Rui Teixeira to Mark Penn to Stan Greenberg. They are panicked. They are even Newsweek said that Trump might be the first Republican to win the popular vote in 70 years. So get involved at every level that you can.
Larry, just speak to really quickly, what did you say about the Red Cross and Goodwill? Because those seem like such nice organizations to donate to.
Yeah. They don't. They're involved in supporting all the activities in Gaza, in Hamas. We stopped giving to the Red Cross after 9/11. We sent in some money after 9/11, and then it was revealed that the Red Cross was using like 1% of that money on 9/11 and stashing 99% for, quote, other emergencies. So you need to very carefully, Catholic Relief Charities is big in Arizona here in funneling the illegal criminal aliens into other parts of the countries. Watch where your money goes. Watch it.
That's interesting. Do you have any charities that you find that you've already vetted?
Yeah, I've got a couple of real favorite ones. One is Best Friends Pet Cemetery. I believe in adopting all the poor little animals you possibly can. And, you can check out your local church. All churches are not the same. One of ours here close to us has been active in getting the illegal criminal aliens in. Others are not. So make sure you check out what you're doing. Franklin Graham's Samaritan's Purse is wonderful. I give to a church called Dream City Church that has a program for rescuing trafficked women. So that's a very good place to start.
Very interesting discussion, Larry. I truly appreciate your time. Patriot's History of Globalism, its rise and decline. I assume that you can buy it anywhere, yes?
It's for pre-sale right now. Goes on sale in Barnes & Noble and all the other bookstores on the 20th. And if people want to email me at larry@wildworldofhistory.com, we can arrange for me to get you an autographed copy.
Excellent. Larry Schweikart, thank you so much. It was great having you on Bold and Blunt.
Thanks. I'm glad we got together.
Fascinating discussion. If you like Bold and Blunt, you may get Bold and Blunt at edify.app, at washingtontimes.com, at Real Life Network, and of course, wherever podcasts are available. I want to thank you for subscribing if you already are a subscriber to Bold and Blunt, and regardless, thank you for listening to this episode. Tune in next time. In the meanwhile, don't forget, stay blunt, stay